Emma had always been drawn to old houses, with their creaky floors and hidden nooks. So when she stumbled upon a decaying mansion at the edge of town, nestled deep in the woods, she couldn't resist. The house was abandoned, its windows boarded up, its once grand exterior now overrun with vines and decay. The locals called it the Whispering House and avoided it, but Emma was intrigued. She felt a strange pull, an inexplicable need to explore its depths. Ignoring the warnings from townspeople about the house's history, she made her way inside one autumn afternoon. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dark, musty interior. Dust motes floated through the air, and the scent of rot clung to the walls. The house felt eerily silent, as though it had been waiting for her. Emma wandered from room to room, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The furniture was still there, though covered in decades of dust. Paintings, crooked and fading, hung on the walls, their subjects staring out with hollow eyes. She paused in front of one particularly unsettling portrait, a woman in a Victorian gown, her expression cold and lifeless. Beneath the painting, a plaque read, Vance, 1892. As she stared at the portrait, Emma felt a strange sensation, like she was being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, but when she turned around, the room was empty. Shaking off the feeling, she continued her exploration. The house was massive, with long corridors and staircases that twisted into the darkness. But it wasn't until she reached the top floor that she heard it, whispering. Faint at first, almost like a breeze brushing through the cracks in the walls. But as she walked further down the hallway, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, filled with voices too faint to understand but too chilling to ignore. Emma stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. The whispering seemed to be coming from inside. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Something deep inside her screamed not to open it, but her curiosity overpowered the fear. She twisted the knob and stepped inside. The room was small, dimly lit by the fading daylight seeping through a cracked window. In the center of the room stood a large, antique mirror, its surface dark and grimy. The whispering stopped the moment she crossed the threshold, and an eerie silence settled over the room. Emma approached the mirror, drawn to its distorted reflection. As she wiped away the dust from its surface, she saw her reflection staring back at her. Except, it wasn't quite right. Her reflection seemed off. The eyes were darker, the expression more sinister. It wasn't her, not really. Before she could react, her reflection moved on its own. Emma gasped, stepping back in shock, but the figure in the mirror remained still, its dark eyes locked onto hers. And then, it smiled. A cold, twisted smile that sent a wave of terror through her. She stumbled backward, but her feet seemed glued to the floor. The figure in the mirror began to move, stepping closer, pressing its hands against the glass as though it was trying to break free. The whispering returned, louder now, filling the room with voices overlapping, chaotic and frenzied. Emma clapped her hands over her ears, trying to drown out the noise, but it only grew louder. The air around her felt thick, suffocating, as if the house itself was alive, pulling her deeper into its grasp. "Get out!" the voices hissed in unison, their tone dripping with malice. Emma spun around, desperate to flee, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Panic surged through her as she rattled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers turned into angry shouts, filling her head with incomprehensible words, her heart racing in terror. She turned back to the mirror, and to her horror, her reflection was no longer just a reflection. The figure had stepped through the glass, now standing in the room with her. Its face was twisted into a grotesque mockery of her own, its eyes dark and soulless. "Leave," it rasped, its voice a chilling echo of her own. "Before it's too late." Emma backed away, her mind racing for a way out, but the figure lunged at her, its icy hands grasping for her throat. She screamed, stumbling backward into the door, her hands clawing at the wood. Just as the figure's fingers grazed her skin, the door flew open, and Emma fell into the hallway, gasping for breath. The whispering stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The house was silent once again, but the air was thick with menace. Emma scrambled to her feet and ran, her footsteps pounding down the stairs and through the darkened halls. The house seemed to twist around her, its walls narrowing as though trying to trap her inside. She reached the front door, throwing it open and bursting into the cool evening air. She didn't stop running until she was far from the house, her chest burning, her mind spinning with disbelief. When she finally dared to look back, the house loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding. The windows, now shattered and black, seemed to stare at her, watching, waiting. Emma never returned to the mansion, but the whispers followed her. Late at night, when the world was quiet, she would hear them, faint, almost imperceptible, but always there. They called to her, beckoning her back to the house, to the mirror, to the dark figure that wore her face. She knew deep down that the house wasn't finished with her, not yet.